These instructions are for the Yib or Yab puppets. You can make them out of faux fur. They have arms that you can attach to an arm rod. They have a movable mouth. You can also make them out of fleece. Here's a couple of simple puppets. You could get them more elaborate. Put some clothes on them, give them some hair. That brown one there is made from minky. That's another fabric choice. Before we even get started stitching, we need to determine the direction of the pile of the fabric. Whether you're using fleece or fur, it has a pile. That's the fuzzy part of your fluffy fabric. And the direction is whichever direction, when you pet the fabric in all four directions, one way is going to lay down nice and smooth, and the other ways are going to look like you rubbed it the wrong way. So just use your best judgment, pet the fabric in all directions to see which one lays down the most smoothly, and then mark that on your fabric. I like to put a little piece of tape with an arrow on it, and that tells me the direction of pile, which is going to be very important later when we stitch the puppet. Hoop some tearaway stabilizer and stitch color 1, which gives you a placement outline. Make sure the pile direction of your fabric matches up with the arrow on the placement outline that you just stitched, and fold your fabric in half. Place the fold at the top of the head, and then go ahead and unfold the fabric and smooth it out. Stitch color 2 for the eye applique placement. I've got a placement line for the eyes. I'm going to put some white fabric. I'm using scuba, but any kind of white fabric would work for the eyes. And then there's a tack down stitch, and go ahead and use some applique scissors to cut away the excess around both eyes. And then stitch the eye applique outline and the pupils. It's best to use a clear soluble topper to stitch those eyes. You'll get a much better result on these fluffy fabrics if you do. At this point, you can do the optional eyelids by placing a couple of squares of fabric over the eyes, right side down. Stitch color 6 to do a fold line, and then fold the bottom up towards the top, and stitch color 7, which will tack down over the eyelids. And then you can just trim away the excess on top of the eyelids. Stitch color 8 for a fold line between the eyes. Now we're ready to fold our fabric in half. Just lift the left eye off of the tearaway stabilizer and fold in half using that fold line. If there's any threads getting in your way, just clip those so that they don't prevent you from getting a nice clean fold at that line you just stitched. And fold the fabric in half. And then just stitch the seam. And you may be wondering, like, how do you turn this into a puppet? Well, I'm going to unhoop it and show you on the back of the stabilizer, there's a cutting line. So the placement line that you put on the stabilizer in the very beginning is actually your cutting line. And you can see it there. Sorry, I didn't change my bobbin to a black bobbin. I should have done that, but hopefully you can see this. That line cuts out both the seam allowance around the body and the head of the puppet, and also the mouth area. Be careful that you don't cut the fold at the top where the eye is. We're going to need that to be the front of the puppet's face. I will warn you, if you're using a very thick fur, you'll have to cut one layer at a time and cut just the backing of the fur, pulling away the stabilizer. And it's important that you don't remove the stabilizer until after you've done the cutting. And then just go ahead and remove the little bits from around the edges. And then there's little stray threads there. That's going to loosen up that basting thread. And we can turn it right side out. Super easy. Just got to test it out here. So it's already starting to look like a puppet. And you can just pull out that extra thread, little basting thread from the fold line. You don't need that there. Now for the mouth plate. That's what it's called for the puppet's mouth. It's called a mouth plate. You want the stretchy part of the fleece to go along that stretch arrow that I showed on the stabilizer there. And this is just one layer of fleece. It's going to tack it down, and then there's a little area for the tongue in the middle, and you want to put some tongue fabric down there, and it's going to applique that. There's the tack down stitch. Cut as close to the line as you can, just like any applique. Okay, so the tongue is ready for the satin stitch, so I put that on the machine, did the satin stitch. And I had a little corner that's still showing, and this is why I like to use black fabric for the mouth, because I can just get a Sharpie and color that over. No one will ever know, except you, because I confessed. Okay, so there's the tongue and the mouth plate, and now I've got another piece of fleece. And again, the stretch arrow is going to go up and down with the tongue there, stretchy side. Just lay it right side down, and then do the seams. And on this one, you can go ahead and pull the stabilizer, the tearaway stabilizer away first before you cut anything. You also want to remove it from the mouth and the tongue area too. Get all the stabilizer off because we're going to be gluing on this back side of this fleece, so we have to get all the stabilizer off of there. Now on this side has the tongue on it. You want to turn it over, and this is going to be the inside. You won't see this. And look where those little lines are. We need to cut this open between those lines. So I'm pulling up and just going to cut one layer of fleece from side to side. So that's going to be the opening of the mouth plate where we can turn it. Cut off the excess around the seam allowance. About 1/8 of an inch is fine. The fleece is not going to unravel. And then turn it right side out. There's the mouth. There's a pattern in your instructions for these little mouth plates, as well as a list of materials that you'll be able to use for this. I'm using an old plastic placemat for this one, so it's kind of flexible, and then I'm just gluing it to the side of the mouth that has the tongue on it. Doing one side at a time, and make sure you leave a little bit of room in the middle there. You see how the two brown plastic pieces are not touching in the middle. Be generous with the glue, but don't let it seep through the fabric. Again, fleece is really good for this because the glue does not seep through. And what we're going to be able to do is put our hands in that extra area there to work the mouth. If you want to, and this is optional, but you can add some tape to cover that seam because you don't want hands getting scratched by plastic or whatever you put in there. I'm using bookbinder tape, but any kind of tape will do for this. It's, as long as it sticks to your plastic piece, it works fine. And now we're ready to put the mouth into the puppet, and this might be the part that you're like, how do you do this? I'm going to glue with some hot glue, and I'm using a fabric glue stick, which I find works really well with fleece. You could also use a fabric tack, or you could hand stitch and use a ladder stitch. I'm just cutting the little excess off of the seam because I don't want that those little corners to poke out. And then I like to pin at the front, the top and the bottom, and then both sides, and make sure that the sides right there in the middle line up where the mouth fold is. And then I just start hot gluing. I like to do like the 4 points that I've pinned there or clipped. Pins or clips, either one is fine to use. And we'll speed through that too because it's boring just watching glue dry. But so far I've done quite a few of these with hot glue, and it holds really well. And then if you have little pieces like this that are kind of sticking up, just go ahead and glue those down. Try to get it as smooth as you can. Otherwise, if it has little wrinkles in it, it's going to look like your character is old with wrinkles around the mouth. So that's something to watch out for. And I had a little bit of glue, and I'm just using my curved scissors. You can get right down to the surface and cut off any glue bits that might be sticking out. That's just optional. Okay, so test it out, see how it's going. Now let's give him a brain. We're going to speed through this brain because it's a very simple thing to make. We'll start by stitching color 1 on the stabilizer, doesn't matter what kind. And then place your fabric and stitch color 2 to tack down. Color 3 does the brain details. Just a little whimsical fun there. A lot of times puppets have foam inside, but in this case we're going to do a head pillow. You need a very stretchy fabric for the back. And then tint it, and it's okay if it wrinkles while you stitch. It's a brain, it's okay if it's wrinkled. And then cut that out. Turn it right side out. Very easy, it's very stretchy. And stuff it very full of stuffing. We want it to be big and fluffy. Just pinch the opening closed and put a little dab of glue or hand stitching to close that up. That's going to go inside the puppet's head to give it some shape. For the arms, we start with color 1, stitching the placement outline on some tearaway stabilizer. And then take your arm fabric with right sides together. You place both layers over the placement stitches, and then you stitch color 2, which is the seams. These are double stitched. And like we did with the body, flip it over and the stabilizer has a cutting line. So that placement line that we did in the beginning is going to be our cutting line, and that'll give you the correct seam allowance for a fabric that doesn't fray like fleece. For the fingers, you can use that cutting line, but do be careful. So I like to get the excess out of the way first, and then just cut those little triangles. Snip there and snip there. And then when I go all the way towards the fingers, I want to make sure I don't cut my seam, so I like to turn it over so I can get a really good view of the seam and get really close to there. And just be careful you don't clip that seam, and then just cut off the little triangles around the edges, and that's enough to get the seams, the seam allowance small enough so that the hands are easy to turn. And now that we've got them cut out, you can go ahead and tear away that stabilizer. I find it easiest to tear it away from the inside of the arm first, and then go ahead and pull the rest of it away from that seam allowance. That tiny strip should just pull right away. I'm going to use hemostats that have kind of a long, wide jaw. They're not the tiny ones. They're a little bit fatter. You can also use an easy point and turner or whatever method you like to turn the fingers right side out. Fleece is very easy to turn, so don't be scared by this. For the puppet arms, you have a few options. You can use fiber fill to stuff the hands and arms. You could leave them empty if you wanted to. What I like to do is use these foam hair curlers that I find at the dollar store and just cut them in half. You take the wire out first, you don't need the wire, and then cut them in half for these long ones, and then put 2 pieces inside the arm in each arm, and that way you get a nice break at the elbow so that the arm bends like a regular arm. And then you just close up that little opening with either glue it or hand stitch it closed. And to attach the arm, just get a strong thread and double strand it. And I like to do about 2 to 3 stitches right at the bottom of the chin, and then just tack stitch a few times to attach that arm, and then tie a knot and bury the thread. And do that for both his arms. And for a very cheap and easy way of doing arm rods. Now I'm going to create another video that gives you different methods for arm rods, but this is the cheapest, fastest way. Get a piece of clear tape, a little rubber band hair tie, and then attach it to the top of a dowel rod, or this clear plastic is actually a balloon stake. These are also at the dollar store. They're in the party aisle where the balloons are. And just tape that little rubber band to the top of the clear stick and then put it around the hand. And now you've got an arm rod for a puppet. You can repeat it on both arms, or usually if you're new at puppetry, just one arm rod is all you need. So you'll have one hand controlling the puppet's mouth and the other hand will control one of the arms. For the puppet's nose, there's a couple of different nose patterns in the instruction document, or you can create your own. You should use a strong thread and then just do a running stitch all the way around your nose shape. and then just pull the thread tight and put some stuffing inside, and then go ahead and close that up and take a few extra stitches on the back side just to make sure it's nice and secure. For attaching the nose to the puppet's face, you can put it wherever you want it. I do recommend hand stitching the nose onto the face because kids like to boop those noses, they like to pull on them, so it is better to have a hand stitched nose rather than glue it on. The glue may come loose. There are a lot of different options for puppet hair. Here's one. I'll just give you a quick example of a little feather hair clip that you can buy where you get like children's hair accessories and they have these little feathery things, and I just take the little hair clip off and glue that on top of his head. I mean, how simple is that? You could also use faux fur. You could create a yarn wig. There are a lot of different options. I have a series of videos on how to make doll hair, and you can use those same principles for doll hair for puppet hair. Just make it fit the puppet's head. For a few other ideas on embellishing your puppet, you could take a furry puppet and the pink guy has his face trimmed around his eyes and mouth, gives him a different look. The blue guy doesn't even have eyes stitched on. I skipped all of those steps, and you could add ping pong ball eyes for a puppet if you wanted to do that. Here's some very simple fleece puppets. They have faux fur hair and their noses match their bodies. Very simple for these. And these puppets are a little more dressed up. They've got brightly colored noses. They have faux fur either hand-stitched or glued on for a wig, and then these have clothes on. You could make clothes on your own, or you can also find very small, like baby clothes, that will fit the smaller puppets. That's it for this tutorial. Now go make some puppets.